On today's World Insight, strained relations between China and Britain. Can the golden era ties be restored? The trouble with the current relationship. And worsening tensions between the world's top two economies. Can they find common ground in the near future? An interview with the former U.S. ambassador to China.
Well, people are the same. The United States and China, we have the same goals, interests, and desires. Keeping that in mind, I think, is extremely important.
Here's our host, Tian Wei.
Hello and welcome to World Insight. I'm Tian Wei in Beijing. Shifts in British foreign policy have signaled a seismic change in the attitude toward China. Last month, the British government banned Huawei from its 5G network, suspended its extradition treaty with Hong Kong SAR, and also extended its China arms embargo to the city. With the golden era of relations turning into unknown situation, where are the China-UK relations headed? And will we see more hostility in the UK on China? And what about China's attitude toward the UK? Before we get down to a discussion with both sides, take a look at Chinese ambassador to the UK recently, Liu Xiaoming's response.
China has not changed. It is the UK that has changed. The UK side should take full responsibility for the current difficulties in China-UK relationship.
For more on China-UK ties, we are joined in London Ian Beck, a professor at the European Institute and co-director of the Durandor Forum of London School of Economics and Political Science. In Hong Kong, Tim Summers, senior consulting fellow at the Asia-Pacific program of Chatham House. And in Beijing, Liu Mingli, deputy director of the Institute of European Studies, China Institute of Contemporary International Relations. Welcome, gentlemen, to the program. A lot to talk about. But tell me, how do you see exactly the nature of the relationship between China and the UK now, with paramount challenges, apparently, between these two countries? Mr. Summers, first.
Well, clearly this year the UK-China relationship has moved from a position of being in a pretty good state since 2014 to being in a point where relations have deteriorated over a number of issues. We've had the Huawei decision. We've had the events in Hong Kong, the national security law, and London's reaction to that. We've had other reporting in the UK amidst a sort of much more critical tone in discussion about China in UK political and media circles. So I think we're moving into a much more difficult phase of the relationship between the UK and China. And all that is in the context, of course, of US-China relations, which continue to deteriorate.
Professor Begg, your assessment?
Very similar to what Tim Summers just said, that there's been a deterioration over the last few months, not even a year, in part under American pressure, because the pressure from the Americans over Huawei was enormous for Britain to ban Huawei in the future. Britain, to some extent, feels itself stuck in the middle. It has to make a choice in some areas between China and the US.
Very interesting, because I heard earlier from many around the world that the last thing they want to do is to make a choice, quote unquote, to stand in teams between China and the United States. And that has become apparently a reality facing the UK. Mr. Liu, to you, how would you, from your perspective, assess the relationship?
I think the current situation of China-UK relations is beyond our expectation. We still remember 5 years ago, the golden era was launched by the leaders of the two sides. When we also see a lot of close cooperations between the two sides in the following years. Even in last year, we could not expect such a kind of relations between China and the United Kingdom. I think because I think UK is troubled with European affairs. UK needs to negotiate with the European Union, and UK, the leaders of the UK was also facing domestic issues. For example, the snap election of last year. So the two sides are supposed to have very good relations with each other. But the reality is that we have seen very, very tough time between the two sides.
Right.
We really should spend some time discussing it.
We really should spend some time discussing it. That's exactly what we're doing. We hope also the leaders and also the diplomats would do just as we do right now. Last year, China was Britain's sixth biggest export market. It is worth more than $39 billion, a record high according to the UK Office for National Statistics. At the same time, China was Britain's fourth biggest source of imports, worth more than $64 billion, also a record high. Now, these numbers are important, however, they're not the whole picture. And yet, all of you have been talking about the golden era of China-UK relations. These numbers are great reflection of that golden era. But if you look at the numbers closely, China still are the sixth place, but the United States is at the very first place. So, Professor Begg, how much of it is really about the economics? As President Clinton during his campaign said, it is the economy, stupid.
Yes, well, there is always going to be the economy stupid, and you'd expect me to say that as an economist. When you look at what's happening with China, the figures you just quoted show the massive surplus that China runs vis-a-vis the UK, and that is a significant consideration. By contrast, Britain has a surplus vis-a-vis the United States. The United States is a market more than 2.5 times as big as China for UK exports. And one throwaway statistic that's sometimes quoted is that Britain exports more to Ireland than it does to China. So China has to be put in perspective as an influence on the British economy. And although it is potentially an enormous market, the reality is that it's quite a long way away, and distance still matters in trade, and the relationships with foreign investment, important though they are second order compared with the Americans. This all leads me to the obvious deduction, which is that the US is going to remain the most significant economic partner.
Mr. Summers, of course, the economists tend to look at the numbers, but I really wonder about the geopolitical strategists like you, Mr. Summers. What would you say?
20 years ago, those trade volumes were much, much smaller in proportionate terms. They've grown rapidly. In 2019, I think the UK's trade with China grew faster than it did with any other region in the world. And I think the potential there is something that comes from the ongoing growth in China's market, the emergence of the middle class, the shift in China's economy to a sort of economy that might be importing more British services or more British luxury goods. And so I think those are where the trading opportunities lie for the UK. But I think from the UK's perspective, the UK has a number of important partners economically and politically. The rest of Europe, the European Union, is probably at the front of that, the US, China, but also other Asian countries, Japan, and so on. So the UK probably ought to be looking at some sort of multipolar foreign policy that takes its relations with all of those into account and doesn't allow any one relationship to dominate the others.
You said something very important, that is how the UK is looking at itself, particularly after the Brexit, its relationship with the EU, with the United States, with China, and how does it see the world likely to be, and therefore has its best opportunities. The UK is well known for figuring that out over the decades. Mr. Summers, do you think, in a way, with the recent actions and reactions coming from the UK regarding China and the future of China-UK policy, can you read some signs of a clear strategic thinking?
I don't think it would be wise to read too much into the current sort of mood about China in 2020. I think the shifts that we've seen in British policy are partly to do with domestic politics and the rise of voices, particularly in the Conservative Party, but elsewhere in Parliament, that are more critical in China. But it's more to do with the immediate politics, I think, than any big strategic decision. And I think the strategy will take a long time to come, and it may not come very cleanly or clearly for some time yet. The reason being that the UK has a range of potentially contradictory interests when it comes to many of these partners, whether it's the US or China or the European Union. I mean, with the US foreign policy is not particularly popular in the UK at the moment, but at the moment the UK's policy tilt is more towards Washington than towards Beijing. So I think it's really the very immediate politics that's driving what the government's been doing vis-à-vis China over 2020 so far. We haven't yet seen a strategy. I think that will be difficult for the government to put together, because the world's a complicated place and British interests are conflicting with each other in different parts of the world.
Professor Begg, what about your reading? Is the UK attitude toward China, at least for now, temporary, or it is an immature series of decisions that have been made so far by the current administration?
I don't think it would be fair to say that Boris Johnson does strategic. What we've seen over the last few months since his general election victory in December is a series of initiatives, of which China is quite well down the list. He's had to deal with the Brexit withdrawal to begin with. Then he's been hit by the COVID crisis. He's faced this enormous pressure from the Americans over Huawei as part of the American-Chinese, shall we call it, dispute. He has to deal with a major challenge in the social care sector, which has been disastrous in the UK for many years. So I don't think there's a lot of strategic focus on China at the moment. It's interesting to note, nevertheless, that some of the pressure that you could qualify as hostile to China has come from middle-of-the-road members of his own party. For example, the person who chairs the Foreign Affairs Committee in the House of Commons, Tom Tugendhat, has been leading a fairly hostile approach to China, which we've seen coming out in the Huawei decision. So there's a number of strands here.
Since you talk about Boris Johnson, let's take a look at what Boris Johnson's track record has been about China. As the mayor of London when he was, the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson was an enthusiastic supporter of policies to win Chinese investment, going as far as calling himself a Sinophile. In July this year, he said that earlier he said China is a giant geopolitical factor in politics and the lives of Britain's next generations. And although he did say that Britain will be tough on China on some things, but will continue engagement. How do you read this rather mixed engage and far away and engage and far away, the kind of choices the Johnson administration have been apparently having?
So economically, the two sides should have good relations. But the reality is that we need to find what's behind the UK's policy towards China from the perspective or political view. Because politically, for Boris Johnson, for the British government, the priority is not China policy. I think the number one priority is UK's relationship with European Union, the bilateral talks for the future economic relations. That's the priority.
With the possibility it is another transactional government, just as that, probably in a lesser degree in Washington, how do you think China would react and also draw upon its approach toward the UK? After all, it takes two to tango, but sometimes it takes one to lead.
I agree with what Ambassador Liu Xiaoming had said. China wants to be a good friend, wants to be a good partner with the United Kingdom. But how to respond to the tough policy from the United Kingdom, that's a challenge. To my understanding, maybe China can wait for a while to wait for the UK's next policies towards China, towards Hong Kong, because if we see retaliation of even tougher measures from the Chinese side as a response to the UK's policy, we maybe push the UK to the American side to make the UK and the United Kingdom to stand together on their Chinese policies. I don't think that's a rational choice. I think, to my understanding, the UK government, President Boris Johnson, is also waiting and considering next steps.
I want to ask all of you a final question. With unpredictability being the theme of this year, how do you think at least China and UK can manage the unpredictable damage from now until the U.S. election comes to an end, and probably until the U.S. inauguration next year early? Mr. Summers.
I think the best thing probably for the two governments to do is to try to communicate as much as possible, and to do that in an open and frank way. There are clearly issues on which the British and Chinese governments disagree at the moment, but I think it's much better to try and have those disagreements directly, well, not face-to-face just at the moment, but over Zoom or over the telephone. So I think that sort of direct communication and understanding, and ultimately accepting to some extent that both sides are operating under pressures of the foreign realities that they see, of the domestic politics that they face, of the historical legacies that they bring to these issues. Now, these are complicated questions, and the world is a complicated place at the moment, but hopefully a little bit of direct dialogue can make those problems a little bit less damaging for relations over time.
Professor Begg.
I think that one area where China can maybe help to defuse some of the tensions would be to understand what it is that really concerns Britain in the relationship at present. Britain's not in a position to lead on many of the things that we're discussing. It's, as I said earlier, caught between the US and China.
All right.
If China wants to try to bring Britain closer to it, it needs to make some gestures.
Lastly, Mr. Liu, Professor.
I think the two sides are capable of managing this kind of relations. We know UK is a country with very good diplomacy experience. And I think what leads to the current situation, to a large part, is because of the misunderstanding. Let's take the Hong Kong, for example. I think from the UK side, they are concerned about the one country, two systems. But the reality is that the security law of Hong Kong is to protect the prosperity and the stability of this region. That will help maintain the one country, two systems. That's not what the UK expect. Maybe the Hong Kong will go to socialist. It's not the case. I think that there are misunderstandings on Hong Kong issue and other issues.
Thank you so much for the three of you. A lot to talk about. Our program is limited in time for such a vast range of topics. But for now, I have learned already a lot. Ian Begg, Tim Summers, Liu Mingli, thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us and exchanging your views. You're watching World Insight. Still to come on our program. Worsening tensions between the world's top two economies. Can they find common ground in the near future? An interview with former U.S. Ambassador to China, Ambassador Max Baucus. Stay tuned.
If Americans would spend more time getting out of America and come over to China, see China, and to deflate some of the myths, one way or another about China, and vice versa.
Welcome back. You're watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei. Let's continue our special series, Pathfinder. The free fall in relations between the world's two top economies. U.S. President Donald Trump sought a forced sale of TikTok. Last month, the U.S. abruptly ordered China to close its consulate in Houston. It seems everywhere you turn, bilateral relations are in a sorry state. Chinese ambassador to the United States, Cui Tiankai, recently said relations were indeed at the lowest point in nearly half a century between the two countries. So, can China and the U.S. get past the insult and the rhetoric and find common ground? Earlier, I spoke to Max Baucus, the 11th U.S. ambassador to China from the year 2014 to 2017. With his decades of experience in U.S. political arena and his past communications with China, what's his assessment of the bilateral ties? Let's listen to his words. What do you think could be the worst scenario as we go toward the presidential election in your country?
It's possible, although I think unlikely, that the United States government will ratchet up even more pressure against China. President Trump has already revoked the special status for Hong Kong, and also is working toward potential additional sanctions on Chinese officials with respect to alleged human rights violations in Xinjiang, as well as violations in Hong Kong. Then after that, there's restrictions on Huawei and companies who are selling products to Huawei and Huawei suppliers. So it could get worse. I think it's unlikely, though, because if it goes too far, then it's going to make it very difficult for normalcy to recur after the election.
We have noticed that now in the U.S. society, even some people trying to spread the conspiracy that 5G could contain coronavirus. That when you have a app trying to do the tracking of coronavirus spread, that app could have conspiracy theories involved. How would China be able to persuade the American people?
Well, I think the United States has been way too hypercritical in its criticism of China. This is a political season in the United States. President Trump running for re-election, members of the Senate and Congress running for re-election, and they're using China as a scapegoat, as a whipping boy to help them get elected. It's very easy to criticize. It's very hard to be more constructive. But I do think, frankly, that we are reaching obviously a very low point in the relationship, and the only solution out of this thing is for both countries to be much more transparent, put everything on the table. It'll take a long time, but slowly but surely, if there's good faith, there has to be good faith on both sides, and that'll help a little bit.
However, if you look at the reality that the current administration is trying to decouple, quote unquote, from China ASAP, as long as it serves its political agenda for the election. So do you think a mechanism, as you just mentioned, could really be established?
Well, nothing can be done before the election. The situation is just too toxic. It's just impossible to have any meaningful action before the elections in the United States. Then after the United States, frankly, it's going to take a very solid administration, whether it's Trump or Biden, to say, okay, we've got to deal with China. We have to deal with it as grown-ups, as adults. China's not going anywhere. China's always going to be there. China is growing. It's strong. We have to find a way to accommodate China. Not in this superficial sense, not in this subservient sense, but to deal with China in a realistic sense, where we both self-respect each other. And we have to start setting lines, which we describe privately to each other, not publicly. We're way too public in our criticism of China.
Chinese State Councilor Foreign Minister Wang Yi proposed 3 possibilities. One is things that the U.S. and China can cooperate on. Second, U.S. and China can dialogue about. Third, U.S. and China can manage and control the risks. He suggests to put all the issues between China and the United States to these 3 columns so that the 2 sides will be having a clearer mind and now to mix everything together and come up with the solutions to every one of them. From your perspective, what is the way to control the damage?
For Mr. Wang Yi, it's a good idea. I know him. He's a very reasonable person. I always like working with him. It's a very good approach. And I think if he continues with that approach, continues suggesting that approach, and also if the Chinese government is a little more transparent, it is explaining in more detail what it's doing and showing that it wants to work. For example, if it were to back off and not ram trawlers in the South China Sea, if it would work with the Philippines, work with Vietnam, work with Brunei, work with the other claimants in the area, that would help a lot. And also with respect to cyber, show that, say, Huawei or ZTE or other Chinese companies, the technology and the software is there for everybody to see, and the Chinese government and the companies will work with Western countries, including Great Britain and the United States, so those countries understand that those countries need not worry about espionage in their countries, but they have to show. China has to show, not just say.
On some of the points you just mentioned, may I provide more information? Huawei, for example, even a few months ago, already suggested by its founder, Ren Zhengfei, that Huawei is willing to open its system. So it seems that many of the fronts that you've been trying to suggest, China has already been trying to cover in terms of transparency. Having said that, though, Mr. Ambassador, if I could turn the table and ask you whether U.S. has shown its transparency and whether U.S. is willing to work with China at all, or already see China as the opponent, and no matter what one party, for example, China does, it will always fall into whatever category the U.S. designed as the enemy.
Well, it's a very good question. In fact, especially in this administration, just to turn a deaf ear and a blind eye to any effort to try to work out some accommodation. So Republicans and Democrats both, it's very toxic. Well, to answer your question really depends on what we see after the elections. Full disclosure, I'm supporting Joe Biden, and if he is elected president, my judgment is that it'll be less toxic. It'll be less heated in its rhetoric and criticism of China. It'll be more rational. Now, still, China is a big foreign power. It's a rising country. Many Americans are concerned about China. And so China's, in that new atmosphere, it's going to have to show it is being more transparent. Your suggestion about Huawei showing us no open door, that's great. There has to be more of that. And if there is more of that, you'll see that the attitude in the United States, especially after the election, and most especially if Biden's elected, will be more willing to listen to factual presentations by China. But again, I go back to deeds. It's actions that count even more than words. Both sides. But we have to work on that.
Right. Mr. Ambassador, I know when you were in China, you were extremely passionate about that. And also, even you retire from the ambassadorial position, you also have been working consistently, even with your family members, on that. That is, the people-to-people exchanges and relations between China and the United States. You traveled most of the provinces in China. But, Mr. Ambassador, I am afraid I have to report to you the very fabric of that most important relation between China and the United States now is being damaged because of an earlier order coming from the current administration about punishing international students. 30% of them could be Chinese students. Though they rescind their decision, but the soup is already becoming spoiled.
It's true. I have to correct you a little bit. I did travel. I did go to every single province.
Okay, good for you, sir.
Yeah, and I loved it. It was a great job because I really like the Chinese people, and the reward of working on the relationship U.S.-China to help get it right was wonderful. It was a great reward. But fortunately, the administration did rescind that decision about online courses in U.S. universities, and therefore it's not as draconian toward Chinese students as before. But part of the problem, too, is not very many Americans have been to China. Americans really don't understand China. I wonder how much time Secretary of State Pompeo was personally spent in China other than his official capacity. U.S. officials do not know China very well. They've not spent much time in China at all. The only ones that have are the people in the think tanks, the academics. They've been to China time to time, but too few members of Congress, too few members of the United States government have been to China. You got to go to see, taste it, smell it, feel it, understand what it is, and then realize that Chinese people are very similar to American people, have the same hopes and desires. They want to have food on the table, take care of their kids, good education for their kids, decent health care, decent, air and water not polluted. We're basically the same, but that's a huge issue. Americans just do not understand Indo-China. And if they were, they'd feel more comfortable with China and realize they can start working with China.
How do you think there can still be efforts made to repair or to mend the fabric of people-to-people relations? Many are disheartened by the series of actions recently the current administration took towards China.
Well, at lots of levels. For example, this is not people to people, but what if, for example, President Biden were to go to China and spend some time going around China, not just meet with President Xi and Zhou Enlai, but to go around the country, and go to various provinces and have stinky tofu with Chinese. I mean, it just show that he's a real person.
You even designed the menu for him already.
that would go a long way. That would help a lot, Frank.
Putting jokes aside, for you and your service to your country, and certainly to promote the exchanges between China and the United States, Mr. Ambassador, thank you so much. Being in China for years, Ambassador Baucus enjoyed doing the rounds in China, retracing Chinese history and encouraging more Americans to visit China, thus creating better understanding between the two countries. In the year 2016, I had the chance to interview him while Ambassador Baucus got down to the Jianchuan Museum cluster in Sichuan province for a history remembered on both shores during the World War II. Today, even with tensions rising, these Americans are still revered in China as the symbol of two great peoples working toward a common goal in war and peace. Let's take a look. This is Sculpture Garden, built in the museum in honor of those international friends who have been contributing to the cause in China to fight against the Japanese aggression during the Second World War. They're coming from all over the world. Many of them are from the United States originally. For example, Mr. Chennault, who is the head of the Flying Tigers pilots, and General Stilwell, who was then pretty much responsible for the Pacific theater of the Second World War. And I'm here waiting for the U.S. Ambassador, Ambassador Max Baucus, to hear his recounts of that part of the history and his personal experiences here in China. These are the people who have been contributing to the cause in the Pacific theater of the Second World War.
Right.
Many of them are Americans. I'm
Right.
sure you are familiar with some of their faces.
Yeah.
Mr. Chennault.
You can't forget his face. He has the most distinguished profile. He's so amazing. He was so determined. You know, people who succeed tend to be people who are very determined in life, and he was determined to succeed, especially with putting the Flying Tigers together.
Yes, indeed. And they did something wonderful to help China during the Second World War. And also General Stilwell.
Mm-hmm.
He even used to work in the embassy.
Yeah, he's quite a guy. Well, he worked hard. You fight for your country and be of the highest integrity, and you just don't suffer fools gladly, and you just work your very best for your country, and as he did during World War II. He has this wonderful expression. I think it's very important. It is that the higher you climb the flagpole, the more you expose your rear end.
Oh, yes,
That
indeed.
is, the higher you get up, the more people shoot at you, figuratively, and they give you a hard time. The two of them, you know, they had a little tension. They
had a little bit of tension over there.
But they were here for the same cause, the same reason,
Yeah.
to deter Japanese.
That's really what I want to ask you, Mr. Ambassador. I mean, you were born almost at the time of the Second World War.
Yeah.
So how have these gentlemen's experiences and stories in China, and their debates as well, can inspire your work?
They were great men. You know, I can't begin to be great like these two, but I could be inspired by them, and all of us could be inspired by heroes. I would do what I can to help Americans, help Chinese understand each other, because the more we understand each other and the more we appreciate each other's efforts to help each other, the more it's going to help this relationship work really well.
While the ambassador went to visit some of the museum's collections, I also found this corner. Lines of glass walls featuring handprints collected from more than 5,000 senior-aged Chinese soldiers who fought all their ways against the Japanese aggression during the Second World War. According to Chinese official data, China's civilian and military casualties from 1937 to 1945 alone are 20 million dead and 15 million wounded. But eventually, China got Allied support. Among those Allied forces fighting alongside China, still the most well-known today are the Flying Tigers. It's a team of American pilots recruited under presidential authority and commanded by Claire Chennault. They drove planes with shark-faced nose designs, among the most recognizable image of any individual combat unit of World War II. There are wreckage of the Flying Tigers. It was only possible after 3 years of preparation and enormous amount of research. That was recognized by Ambassador Baucus, standing in front of the walls with photos of the Flying Tiger heroes.
I want to give you this letter for all of your work in recovering remains and building these museums to honor something that's so important, so that we will always remember these people who work so much on behalf of us. And more importantly, the strong relationship between the United States and China, and how our two companies work together to deter Japanese aggression. We are deeply indebted to you, deeply.
Ambassador Baucus, it's great to see you.
Yeah, thank you.
How was it when you look around this museum?
Frankly, I'm astounded. I'm stunned. The collection here exceeds my expectations.
And you heard about the 30 volunteers who climbed the high mountain glaciers in order to find the wreckages of the planes and also the bones of the pilots.
Yeah, it's stunning. It's inspirational. I guess some hunters in Tibet first sighted the wreckage and word passed on, and it took 3 years to prepare the expedition to recover the remains and bones and so forth. There may be more up there, I don't know, but recovering those increases the expectation that maybe there's more, and the legend lives on.
When China and U.S. together, they can really do something great, it seems.
Well, we certainly did back in World War II, no question about it, and we certainly can do it again. I think when the chips are down, that is when times get, if not a crisis, but where there's a real challenge, then people tend to work better together. The knowledge that we have many times worked in the United States and China so well together is a good reason to believe we can, and we will. There's no question in my mind. And
what is in your mind that you think could help us to prevent crisis from happening?
I think basically it's important for American people to understand Chinese people are just like American people. You know, same wishes, hopes, and desires, and Chinese people are the same. It also, I think, it would help if we were to travel more, if Americans would spend more time getting out of America and come over to China, see China, and deflate some of the myths, you know, one way or another about China, and vice versa.
But there are certain kinds of sentiment in China who do not necessarily understand what is the real nature of this. Are they trying to corner China into a very small place? Do they really understand the rise of China?
Those are good questions. Those are questions that should be asked. And when they're asked, they should be examined very constructively and with deep efforts and efforts that listen to the other country, to listen to the other country's point of views, because China's not perfect, the United States is not perfect. Each country has its own culture, its own pride, and its own sense of nationalism, but we can't let that get in the way, because with each passing day, the world's getting smaller. We're getting closer and closer together. Actions that occur in one country are going to more likely affect the other country, both ways. When people start to think about it, not just knee-jerk, not just react to what somebody else says, but think about it, they'll realize that we will probably, not only probably, highly likely, we will get together in a positive way, because we have no alternative.
What do you think might be the biggest danger facing the two countries?
I think the biggest potential danger is failure of people in both countries to take the time and effort to learn about the other country. And it's partly because people tend to be a little bit comfortable. It's important for people to get out of their comfort zones. For Americans,
not easy.
Not easy. It takes work. It takes effort. It's like all things in life. It takes work.
Have you tried?
I've done my very best every day, try to understand China better, understand better, and to explain to Chinese people as well as I can the American point of view, and ask lots of questions of the Chinese point of view, so I better understand.
You still have very busy schedule.
Oh yeah, they're always.
Mr. Ambassador, it's such a pleasure to have you over here.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. All the best.
And good luck.
Thank you so much.
Judy, how you?
And that's all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, try to find us World Insight or check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook. I'm Tian Wei in Beijing on behalf of the team. Thanks for watching.